This video is about convection currents and the mantle. Please make sure that you write down all the underlined words and their definitions as you watch this video. Heat transfer is the movement of energy from a warmer object to a cooler object. Nature wants things to be balanced, so if one item is hotter than the other, it will cool to match the temperature around it. Why will this girl burn her hand if she touches the pot? The different types of heat transfer are radiation, conduction, and convection. Heat travels from one object to another. When your warm hand touches the ice cube, some of the heat goes from your hand to the ice and begins to melt the ice. Radiation is a transfer of energy through empty space, such as sunlight or the heat from a fire. It takes place with no direct contact between a heat source and an object. Conduction is heat transfer by direct contact of particles of matter. For example, a spoon sitting in a pot would get hot. So in a pan, you would have the warm rising because of the heat beneath the pan, and then the cool would go down. But the conduction is happening because there's actual contact with the heat source. When you're roasting marshmallows, the heat can heat up, the stick can heat up and burn your hand when you touch it because of the conduction. Then there's convection, and that's heat transfer by movement of a heated fluid. Heated particles of the fluid begin to flow, and those energy, the energy goes from one part of the fluid to another, and it transfers that heat energy. Density is a measure of how much mass there is in a volume of a substance, how compact it is. It decreases as particles are heated because they occupy more space. They're moving around. It increases as the particles cool because they're closer together. They don't move around as much. So which object is more dense? The one where the molecules are closer together or farther apart? Of course, the one where the molecules are closer together. Remember, heat excites molecules and they start moving and pushing away from each other, just like in a hot air balloon. A convection current is a flow that transfers heat within a fluid. And what happens is it moves because of the heating and cooling of the fluid. And then as the fluid heats, the fluid's density changes. The gravity then pulls the fluid back down, and it continues as long as heat is added, as long as there's fluid to be heated. So when we look on the left, we see the heat blob at the bottom. The hot blob begins to rise, and then the cooler water sinks. We can also put heat underneath a pan, and the warm water will rise, and as it reaches the top, it's farther away from the heat. It cools and goes back down and heats back up and cools, and so on and so forth. So how can you use convection currents to explain why warm air rises? Think about it. The warm air gets less dense. It goes up. As it gets farther away from this heat source, it cools and goes back down to the ground or to the floor. As hot air rises, the cool air rushes in underneath to fill the space because there's a vacuum. So the cool air warms up, it rises, and air currents are created. The currents make the convection curler turn. So we can see that the foil spiral here would be turning as a result of the heat from the candle beneath it. There is convection in the Earth's mantle. The Earth's core is incredibly hot, and from the mantle itself, it rises into the asthenosphere. So the core really starts to warm up the rock in the mantle, and we get plumes, which we actually saw in the Inside Planet Earth video. Those plumes come up, and then they cool, and then they fall back down toward the core. So here it really shows us, we can see the core, there's radiation from the interior. We start to get a convection zone where there's rising and falling, and that helps to move the plates around. If you look on the right, you can see that those convection currents are happening right beneath the plates. So this shows just some of the ways that there are convection currents in the mantle. So the three types of heat to review are conduction, where it's direct heat from having contact with the source. Convection, where the hot air is rising or the hot liquid is rising. And radiation, where a heat source is actually giving heat off.